Hello, my name is Mark Carell. I'm chair of the Department of History, Geography, and Politics here at Spring Arbor University. But today, mostly I want to talk and speak about history. I have just a sort of playing a joke on my other colleagues who are telling you about their disciplines. I've called my department the queen of the liberal arts. That's not honest and it's not fair. Of course, there are many other liberal arts that have claims and to being really important. But I do want to show how history is going to be a really crucial part of your understanding of the liberal arts, because history is really the connective tissue between the liberal arts. So what is history? Well, one of my favorite texts to look at is the Harry Potter books. And there they have a historian, Professor Binns. But I think that while Professor Binns should be maybe the most exciting character in this entire story, he is really done wrong by J.K. Rowling. But from the second book, The Chamber of Secrets, Rowling writes this: history of magic was the dullest subject of their schedule. And today was as boring as ever. Professor Binns opened his notes and began to read in a flat drone like an old vacuum cleaner until nearly everyone in the class was in a deep stupor, occasionally coming to long enough to copy down a name or date, then falling asleep again. He had been speaking for half an hour when something happened that had never happened before. Hermione put up her hand. Professor Binns, glancing up in the middle of a deadly dull lecture on the International Warlock Convention of 1289, looked amazed. Miss Granger, Professor, I was wondering if you could tell us something about the Chamber of Secrets, said Hermione in a clear voice. Professor Binns blinked. My subject is history of magic, he said in his dry, wheezy voice. I deal with facts, Miss Granger, not myths and legends. He cleared his throat with a small noise like chalk snapping and continued, in September of that year, a subcommittee of Sardinian sorcerers. So at least according to J.K. Rowling, history has nothing to do with legend. But I actually really here want to disagree, because even something that is untrue like a legend ends up having its own history. Because what's really important in history is not necessarily what happened as much as what people think happened. And that ends up generating and creating its own history. So what is history? History can be defined as just simply the sum of all things that happened in the past. But generally what we as historians do, and in the field of history, is we go back and we look at the past as a kind of laboratory to be able to see what happens when people act in particular ways. History is about making sense of those things that happened in the past to help us understand our own context and to help us understand what it means to be human. So I'm taking actually as our example of how to study history from a person who's not historical, from King Arthur, because the legends himself and the retelling of these legends actually ends up telling us something about the people of their time and the kinds of things that were important of them. So I started out with one of our oldest depictions of King Arthur. This is King Arthur, the Winchester Table, that was made in the High Middle Ages. And this is a King Arthur that's trying to emphasize the aristocracy of King Arthur. King Arthur as a giant among men, is simply a great person. And by having this table as a great lord's table, it showed this lord's connection to that greatness of King Arthur. And this would have certainly been the important thing for people of that age and of that time, to read in King Arthur and see themselves as being elevated above the rest of humanity. So where does history fall in the liberal arts? On one hand, history is a humanity. We house it, and our department is in the School of Humanities, but it was only recently moved over here. So in the sense that history is a humanity, it's because we use the past to try to explain what it means to be human in order for us to understand and explain how people interact and how people think of their times. A good historical study raises more questions than it has answers. And that's really the sign, I think, of a good humanity, is it plunges us deeper and deeper and deeper into asking good questions, getting better ideas, and trying to find deeper knowledge and deeper sense of what it means to be a person, what it means to be a creature, what it means to be a child of God. On the other hand, history also fits well with the social sciences, and you've had social sciences speak as well. And we used to be housed at the social sciences at Spring Arbor because history too, likewise, takes data from the past and compiles and looks at that data and tries to amass it in such a way that we can speak about it and try to describe the world as close as we can to matching that data. And in fact, historians love to borrow the methodology from the social sciences, from psychology, from sociology, anthropology, and we use those basic skill sets and we use those basic interpretations in order to begin to put the scaffolds up to explain why things happen within history. But most of all, what I want you to take away from this little mini lecture is that history is a bridge between disciplines. Every discipline that you study has a history. It started at a particular time. It's had its own sort of great moments of development and evolution. It's had these moments of transition. This is true if you're studying chemistry, as if you're studying health and exercise science or nursing, right? Each of those, at some point in your degree, you will study the history of your discipline. At the same time, history also can utilize everybody's discipline. Historians love to utilize science as a way to kind of understand how the thought works in the past. And how people came up with discovery and reckoned with discovery. Historians love to use nursing and healthcare and psychological health as a way to understand people's ways of thinking about normalcy and what health even is. Historians, like I said, use sociology and psychology and the methods there, or business, right? All of these are tools that the historian will readily use and happily incorporate into her studies in order to be able to advance these questions and get deeper into the knowledge of how people thought and acted in the past. So what do we historians do? Well, at a real basic level, we read and we interpret sources. So in the previous slide, you probably saw a portrait of Bedivere by Walter Crane in 1911, receiving the sword, right, coming out of from the Lady in the Lake. Here in 1911 is shortly before the First World War. You have a much more popular sense of what makes governing possible. And so this kind of idea of like the righteousness of the governed, the righteousness and the authority of the governed and of the people is going to play a really strong role. Likewise, this is a time during art, in art history, when there's a lot of historicism, people trying to go back to the past to try to explain the present. And so those two things sort of add up together to give us a portrait of this particular source, this portrait in 1911, and that allows we historians to try to make some sense out of the past. We then, right, once we read and we interpret the sources, we try to make sense of that evidence. We try to explain it. We try to tell, well, this is probably what people thought in this time period, and this is the way in which they were responding, and this is the way that our sources seem to show us what's going on. We tend to note the continuity and breaks from the past, that there are things from the past that we don't know, things from the past that we do know. And there are times when people are acting in one way for a long period of time, and then suddenly it diverges and they act in a different way for another period of time. Those are really exciting moments, watersheds of history, where suddenly something has happened to change not just the behavior of one or two individuals, but of an entire group. And the last thing we historians do is we write down those stories for future generations. Every generation comes and asks new questions of the same sources. And so we're constantly going back to them with new questions, new ideas, new issues that we're trying to wrestle with in our own present world. And so when I'm writing, I'm not only writing for people to read today, but I'm writing for future generations to look back and say, what were the things that were interesting in the 2020s, just as in the eras before? And so I have, for the picture here, I have all of these retellings in cinema form of the story of King Arthur. Because each generation has gone through and has recast King Arthur as a person of their day and their age as a way to try to conflate, to bring the past and the present together, and by the tension of the two, be able to make sense of our world around us. So, do you have what it takes to be a historian? Probably some of you already think historically. So, I have three basic questions, and if you can answer yes to one or more of these questions, you're probably already thinking like a historian. And the first question that I have to ask you is, when you go to a new place and you meet new people, do you start by telling stories about your past? Like when you came to orientation for the first time here and you were meeting new people, did you start to say, oh, that reminds me of this thing like this? Now, oh yeah, similar thing happened to me in my life. Right? Do you tell stories? If so, you're already thinking like a historian. You're already placing things into context and time. Or maybe you come into a situation, this is my second question, is when you come up with a problem and somebody comes to you and they're really worried about something or they have a problem, do you tell them that you can't really help them or understand it until you go back to the beginning? And you simply say, go back to the beginning. How did this all start? Then you may already be thinking like a historian as well, because you understand that the world's not just as it is, but that there were lots of things and elements that added up to it in the long run. My third question I have for you is, when you go to a new place, do you sometimes envision yourself and say, what would it have been like to be here a long time ago? What would it have been like to be here when my parents' generation was at this school? Or what would it have been like to be back in a castle in the Middle Ages? Right? Are you engaging in a historical imagination, beginning to kind of think, what would it be like to be in a time in the past? If you're involved in any of those three, or if you're involved in all three of those, you're probably already thinking like a historian. And if you would like to continue to hone those skills, we would love to talk to you about what it looks like to major in history or to minor in history. We'd love to have double majors. And like I said, history pairs well with any major here on campus. So if you would like to get to know more about us, please reach out, contact either myself or Dr. Edwards, and we would love to talk to you about what it means to study history. Thank you.